The third time he has taken time out of the schedule to speak with us. I think we keep him young. I'm not sure what it is. So, Secretary Fanning has served in a variety of influential positions throughout his 24 years of service, including most recently as Special Assistant to the Secretary and Deputy Secretary of Defense, and as Acting Secretary of the Air Force between June and December of 2013. He is a 1990 graduate of Dartmouth College and currently serves as Acting Undersecretary of the Army. In this position, he is responsible for and principal advisor on matters related to the management and operation of the Army, including development and integration of Army programs and budgets. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Secretary Fanning.
Thank you all for this opportunity. That is, I guess, the third time. 2 years ago, the first time, I noticed all the cadets sort of at the event and said, "Can you bring them together so I can talk to them?" I guess I was acting secretary at that point. I just saw Secretary Donnelly out there, actually, the secretary I replaced briefly before Secretary James was confirmed. But this is one of my favorite things to do because of the questions that I get in the session. So I'm not going to talk too long because I want to get to your questions. Secretary James and I, when I was the Air Force Undersecretary last year, hosted all the former secretaries and undersecretaries for some briefings. Forgot about that until I got the letter in the mail. Now that I am former Air Force Undersecretary, having moved on twice since that job, if I'm going to come out here and meet with the other former unders and secretaries, I want to speak to cadets again. So I appreciate you squeezing me into your schedule. You got a little bit of my bio. I actually started in this administration. I worked in the Clinton Pentagon as well. Started on the Hill, worked for the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, became Clinton's first defense secretary. That's how I ended up in the Pentagon the first time. Came back in as a special assistant to Secretary Gates for a little while, and then a deputy undersecretary in the Navy Department. From there, moved over to the Air Force. Spent 2 years in the Air Force, and there were a lot of people saying, "Oh, the Air Force, this will never work. They'll never accept a Navy guy." Even though I wasn't really a Navy guy, that was just the job I had at the time. It was a great transition and a great experience. I was under for about 2 months when Secretary Donnelly retired, and became acting for 6 months. We didn't think it was going to be that long, but getting anyone confirmed these days is a challenge. And thought at the beginning of the year that I would be finishing the administration as the Air Force Undersecretary, and very happy about that. I really enjoyed my experience in the Air Force. But Secretary Carter, who I've known since the early Clinton days, since 1993, asked if I would be his chief of staff. He said, "I won't hold you for 2 years. Those are not easy jobs. If one of a certain number of jobs opens up, I'll put you in it." And that happened very quickly. So right now I'm working as the Army Undersecretary and learning another service, which for me is sort of interesting. My father grew up, he did not serve in the military, but grew up at West Point. There's a brother that went to West Point in his career in the military, and a sister married another West Point graduate. That graduate's still alive, and when I went from Navy to Air Force, he was completely confused and started joking that this was all just practice for me to end up with the Army. So now he's thinking he's the master of the universe, managing my career. But let me talk about the Air Force just a little bit, what my experiences were, because I did learn that service when I left the Navy Department. And I think you'll see an Air Force in a much stronger position now than it was 5 or 10 years ago. Its percentage of the budget is going up. Everyone's budget's going down, but its percentage of the budget is going up because it's making a stronger case for itself. And why I think that's true is because if you walk down the hallways of the Pentagon, the Air Force, it says air, space, and cyber, but very much focused on air. The Air Force very much focused on air. Still in many ways it is. But now it is more and more embracing the other parts of the Air Force, ISR, space, cyber that we talked about. I think when I first came to the Air Force, even 2 years ago to the job, there was a lot of angst inside the Air Force that we're a supporting service, not a kinetic service. We got to drop bombs on people's heads. That's what the Air Force has to do. But 2 short years later, very much embracing these other things that it does that are critical to the other services. The other services could not fight, and I see that every day now in the Army, the way they do without the Air Force. And for the Air Force to embrace that and realize that it is in many ways the connective tissue of the joint force, I think has really gone a long way in helping the Air Force in budget battles and political battles on the Hill and with OSD. Before I get to your questions, I was asked to talk a little bit about the role of civilians, because I know we have cadets here, ROTC and the academy, but we also have civilians as well that are interested in air power and national defense. And so there are a number of ways. One of the things I love about the Air Force is the services all have these debates, or the Navy did. Who's a sailor? They enlisted their officer and finally decided that sailors anyway. In the Air Force, when we say airmen, first thing is we say active guard and reserve, which is not something that I hear as much in the Army, that I'm pushing them to think more about their total force. But you'll hear the chief say airmen, active, guard, reserve, civilian. The Air Force very much treats its civilians as an important, integral part of the service. The other services don't do that quite as much as I see in the Air Force, which is unfortunate, because I think a lot of people outside of government think of civil servants, civilians in government as paper pushers. But they are very much the fabric of the service. I mean, those of you that will go into the Air Force and will visit laboratories and depots and these types of places, you realize we have these crown jewels of civilians around our Air Force and our military that could be doing what they're doing outside of the military, outside of the services, and can pay far more money, no doubt, but are linked and believe deeply in the mission of our military. I have never served. Have been doing this, as I said, since I graduated from college, now a very long time ago, and have worked mostly in the Pentagon when I'm in government, a little bit on the Hill, as I said. But I find increasingly, as we get 40 plus years away from or into the all-volunteer force with a smaller military, it is noticeable. Two things are noticeable about that. One, the decreasing understanding of the military on the part of the rest of society. Even on the Hill, the percentage of members of Congress who've served in the military have some connection to military has decreased markedly since I first went to Washington. But what I find in reverse now inside the military is, I'm now surrounded by a bunch of generals, Army generals. A lot of them went to West Point. They went to school together, they grew up together, they fought together, they trained together. And they really need, this is true in the Air Force, true in the Navy, true in the Marine Corps, they really need that civilian, different perspective that they wouldn't have if they just ran themselves. And so the civilians bring a not just the political ones, there are only relatively few of us, but the career ones as well, bring a different perspective to the problem set than those in uniform do, and are critically important, I think, as sort of the, really sort of the connective tissue between those transitions. The politicals come and go, the generals come and go. Some of them move pretty quickly when they get up the ladder at that level. Civilians are the ones that stay and that give you that sense of history of why we did what we did, why we're doing what we're doing, and understanding of why decisions were made, how they were implemented, all these types of things. And so that's particularly important now, as we have an election coming up and all the politicals leave. You want those career civilians who have some tenure to help with that transition and that turnover. So I think it was one of the most encouraging things about the Air Force as a service is how integrated and how seriously the civilians are treated and how carefully they're listened to. The generals don't think of them as, some force in reserve that they have to deal with only because they're told to. They take them seriously, treat them seriously, and they contribute in important ways to the Air Force and across government as a whole. But so I don't know, some of you may end up in careers in government as a civilian. We need more of you to come in. The civil service likes a bum rap, but very important, and many opportunities to serve in different ways. I won't be there that long. I will be on the beach on January 21st, 2017 for a little while. But all right, I don't want to talk any longer. I want to take your questions, so please.
Sure, I've got one. Captain Danway on Dover Air Force Base. Could you talk about the timeline for that transition between administrations and what impacts the force typically sees between administrations?
So it's Well, we're going for a huge transition this summer on the uniform side. Secretary Carter starts in February and has already picked a new chairman, vice chairman, new commandant of the Marine Corps, new chief of staff of the Army, and new chief of naval operations. And soon, next year, we'll have the opportunity to pick a new chief of staff of the Air Force and a number of new combatant commanders. So we've got that transition taking place right now. And essentially, all but two, if you count the chief of the National Guard Bureau and the joint chiefs of staff, changing over this summer. What will happen when the election takes place is anybody's guess. President Obama sort of broke precedent by keeping his predecessor Secretary of Defense for a little while, and other members of that team, including Secretary Donald, who I just saw in the hallway, who stayed into the Obama administration. But generally speaking, after an election, everybody's asked to leave. Resignations are offered and accepted. They'll pick one person. Let's take the Air Force as an example. There are 7 Senate confirmed officials, the Secretary, the under 4 assistant secretaries, and the General Counsel, and then a very small number of non-career SES and more junior political appointees. Most of the political appointees in the Department of Defense are in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, not in military departments. But usually they'll pick one in each of the departments to be the transition until they get someone on their team confirmed. It's anybody's guess what will happen. If a Democrat wins, I mean, all the national security people have worked for all the people who could possibly be president on the Democratic side. But if you're not tired at the end of these jobs, you're not doing them very well. So like I said, I'm headed for that beach, hopefully one way or another. If another party comes in, usually it is a wholesale changeover. And then, like I said, they just keep a very few people to mind that transition until they get the people confirmed. The services are usually, the focus will usually be on getting the OSD appointees in first, and then the services. I think Secretary Hugh in the Army wasn't in until August. Secretary Mavis, April or May, maybe even. So it takes a little while. So you have to have someone there for transition. At the start of the Clinton administration, we actually had a situation you don't want. When you think of civilian control of the military, everybody left in I think it was in the Army and in the Navy. The chiefs were acting secretaries for a little while, which is an uncomfortable situation to be in for them as well. So usually they try and pull someone over. Yeah.
Okay, Lord Mall, Coast University. What did you study in college, and how did you set yourself up for the kind of civilian service that you have now?
So I get that question a lot because everyone thinks that my career was carefully orchestrated. I say it's a result of 25 years of failed job searches. I went to college, studied liberal arts. I actually went to school to be an architect. I was an art major when I first got there. New Hampshire has the first primary in the union in the country, and small state, small college. I happened to be there when both parties had open primaries, so it seemed like you couldn't go to breakfast in the morning without running into a presidential candidate, and I kind of got the bug. So I went and interned in Washington after my freshman year, half the summer for a Republican congressman, half the summer for a Democratic senator, and that was it, and I wanted to come back to Washington. So I didn't focus my studies on what would prepare me to be in Washington. I was a liberal arts major, so I was focusing on liberal arts. I was a history major, like I thought it was a stronger department than the government department, which was also more crowded. But I just started doing extracurriculars, internships, things that were along my interests, which helped me get my first job. And then what I tell people is, and I'm only half joking about failed job searches, but the only job I can think of that I really went after specifically was the Undersecretary of the Air Force job. Usually you're like, okay, I'm restless, I need another job, or maybe another opportunity, and you see something, and you go after it, and it's that process of going after it where all of a sudden the other opportunities pop up. It's like if you're parked on a highway in your car, you're not going to see the billboards. If you're shooting down at 60 miles an hour, all of a sudden the billboards are popping up left and right. And other people see, all right, he's at play, he's into something new. So every time I go after a job, I end up in a job that I didn't even really know existed. And what I tell people is do two things. Do whatever you're given really well, and focus on relationships. Because now things are, Secretary Carter, before it was confirmed, just called me out of the blue. I knew exactly what, there were two positions I didn't really want to do either of them, but I knew he was going to offer me one of them. If you do that, you'll get noticed and people will come after you for other jobs. So this was an interesting, I don't think there's ever been a political appointee, we can't find one who's been appointed to all three military departments, let alone OSD as well. But it was sort of a confluence of, when I was the Deputy Undersecretary of the Navy, the Undersecretary was Bob Work, who's now the Deputy Secretary of Defense. Carter's deputy leaves, he comes back as the Secretary. These are people I've known for years. And when things open and they need, to put someone someplace to fix something or work on something, just because I've known them and worked with them so long, that's how these opportunities present themselves.
Could I first go to University of Oklahoma?
Someone's wondering.
What are the benefits from having, and especially in your perspective in terms of having worked for all three branches at a high level?
So I would, to me, it's a tremendous benefit. And I strongly recommend cross-pollinization if you ever get the opportunity. It is really worthwhile having a good understanding, a strong foundational understanding of what the other services do if you make a career out of the Air Force one way or the other. What has helped me is, what it brings for me is just a different perspective as I come into each service. I can see right away how they do things differently. Why do you do that? Is that a good way to do it, or maybe there's another way to look at it? I told you people said the Air Force would never accept a Navy guy. It was actually the exact opposite. They kept saying, well, how do they do it in the Navy? How does the Marine Corps do it? Is there something you can learn from that? So having seen, as I've moved through these positions, how each of the services approaches something has allowed me to kind of pick and choose the best from all the four services to try and put in place what I'm doing now in the Army. There's another benefit that's the flip side that I think is for the Army. So my first week, I guess it was my second week in the job, was when we had to brief the Army budget to the Deputy Secretary and the Vice Chairman and Joint Chiefs of Staff. I should have waited 2 more weeks to start, but I didn't realize that until I got there. I'm not going to learn the Army budget in 2 weeks, but what I could do is sit there and take the briefing from the Army budget officers and say, all right, this is what the Air Force is going to hear when you say that. This is what the Navy is going to hear when you say that. So this is what the Deputy Secretary is going to hear when you say that. So helping the Army realize how it communicates or maybe fails to communicate, and what the other services think they're hearing from the Army rather than what the Army is trying to say.
Sir, Tyler Johnson, Washington International Guard. I'd like to take that just one step further. This morning, well, every year we come to this, right, and we hear, and I know you guys are excited that, the Air Force is the best, it's better than the Army, it's the best service, right? We all know that's true, it's good. But,
Army program.
good to go. But, sir, I was wondering, Secretary James spoke this morning on the challenges we're facing. Her priorities of people, readiness, modernization, bending the cost curve, making every dollar count. I was wondering if you could speak just a little bit, maybe a little bit more tactically on, what challenges are the Army, or is the Army facing? Is it different? Is it the same? Because we don't really get much purview into that.
So yes and yes, different and the same. All the services are struggling. You could collapse the priorities of the service secretaries and the chiefs into kind of the same thing, which is people, readiness, and modernization, future readiness. All services are feeling a squeeze. I mean, the budget pressure is immense, and the political gridlock in Washington is making it worse. We all talk about the fears of sequestration. What happens if they don't fix it and sequestration stays? Well, the Army is actually in a place where a continuing resolution, which is, I think 11 out of the last 16 years, we've started the fiscal year with a continuing resolution. A continuing resolution basically is you can spend, if you added the budget last year, you can spend it again this year minus 3%. So if you're starting something new, it's not in the budget, you can't start it. We can usually hobble through 2 to 3 months without too much damage, but then you really start breaking things at expense. Contracts have to be broken, multi-years have to be broken. The Army's in a position where a continuing resolution actually takes it below sequestered level. We sort of did it last year, we were making up for it this year, and so this has been going on so long now that the gridlock, these continuing resolutions are driving our budgets to a sequestered level. So we're all facing an immense amount of pressure there. For the Army, when you go into the Navy or into the Air Force, it's pretty easy to get a high-level sense of the important procurement programs because they're huge. The Army doesn't have a lot of programs like that. It has a million programs, but they're all relatively small. The Army is about people in a different way. I mean, that really is how you measure the size of the Army. And they don't fight, you know, the people are the platforms in a different way than you have in the Navy and in the Air Force. So the Army is going through, it really feels like an existential phase for it as it draws down very rapidly. And this bothered me when I was in the Navy Department, it bothered me when I was in the Air Force Department, it bothers me even more now that we send men and women directly into war zones, 5 or 6 deployments, and then we kick them out of the service. They don't want to leave, but we kick them out. And that's the position the Army is in right now. And it feels, the Army feels like it is being drawn down too quickly, and it is being drawn down at this rate to be a bill payer for modernization in other military departments. So that the generals that I'm encountering feel they are at war in the Pentagon, and that they're under siege. And in some ways, they're justified in feeling that way because their budget proportionally has gone down. And they are ramping down very quickly. To try and keep that glide slope from getting any steeper, the Army has pushed off, I think, far too much modernization, which is, we just don't have the money to really wrestle with that right now. We're trying to figure it out. You know, the Air Force, when I was in the Navy, I was looking over the wall of the Air Force thinking, God, what on over there? Because they got to modernize all the platforms at the same time. You want to usually have it staggered out. They need a bomber, they need a fighter, they need a tanker. But the Air Force has those programs under pretty good control. There's a lot of pressure on them, and they're closer to the edge than you might like them to be, but it has them in a sort of a good place. The Army and the Marine Corps did this as well. To protect people as its force structure has really put off modernization. So I worry about readiness today. I mean, I think people outside the military think, how can you not be ready? All you've been doing is fighting. Doesn't that make you ready? It's a very specific type of fight that we've been doing. You know, if we had a large-scale nation-state, near-peer type of a war, the Army isn't really trained to do that. The Air Force has the same issue. You know, this full spectrum readiness that we talk about in the Air Force is also a problem in the Army. But I think really what the Army is going through right now is the sense that it is under siege, it is being squeezed too much, too fast, and doesn't have the money to modernize for the future fight. But you could, you know, the Navy would say the same thing. I mean, if we don't figure out some way to pay for the next class of ballistic submarines, that'll eat the entire Navy shipbuilding budget in the 2020s. So all the services are going through the same squeeze, but the land forces, the Army and the Marine Corps, it's about trying to protect as much force structure as possible and keeping it ready.
Thank you.
Sir Tom Jacobs from Arnold team. You talked a little bit about civilians. I'm curious if you could talk more about the attracting of civilians and then keeping them on board. What we do to try to incentivize them.
Well, not much, unfortunately. One of the worst things we did during 2 years ago with furloughs of civilians, I think we got it down to only 6 pay periods, 1 day of pay period, so 6 days of furloughs. But you know, one of the great things that you're supposed to have when you're a civil servant is job security, and we kind of took that away. So you know, I usually try to talk about civilians when I'm on the Hill or speeches, because I think civilians in government become an easy political pawn. Secretary Gates at his departure event said that bureaucrats and bureaucracy are 2 different things, that nobody suffers a bureaucracy more than the bureaucrats who have to fight it every day. So civil servants from the outside, I think, are seen as part of the bureaucracy. I see them as having to struggle through the bureaucracy that's created for them and still somehow manage to get things done. What keeps them going? And I will say this, the furloughs sucked for the civilians, no question about it. I was traveling and doing all calls and town halls and what have you and getting an earful. But there was sort of an amazing transformation too, because like I said before, people think of civilians as paper pushers, in the back office or something, cutting checks, what have you. Take them out of the force, as we did for those furlough periods. And boy, I'd get off the plane, and the basic man, the first thing he'd say is, "I need my civilians back. You've got to give me my civilians back." And that'd be the last thing he'd say when he put me on the plane. There was a real appreciation, I think, that people didn't have before for what civilians do, how critical they are to some very high, especially in the Air Force. I mean, just some brilliant minds out there. And they were frustrated. They weren't frustrated because they weren't getting a paycheck or the check was docked for that day that they had off. They were frustrated that they were being kept from work. What keeps them here, despite all the things that we do, actually to disincentivize them, is the mission. They are really dedicated to the mission of the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps. And so we're lucky that we have that because the rules that are in place and the way they're treated politically would just drive them away. It does drive a lot of them away. But you hear all the time in Washington, civilians can't have a pay raise that's large in the military. If you're going to draw down the military, you have to draw down the civilian in an equal clip. That's not really a way to rationalize your workforce. We have contractors, civilians, uniformed, across the three components. You need to have, you need to figure out what's the best, what do I need that one to be? Does it need to be someone in uniform? Does it need to be a civilian? So when we get these mandates from Congress, you need to cut, by 10% your civilian force. You need to draw it down as fast as you draw down your uniform force. And you can make any story you want based on what years you pick. Go back 5 years, go back 10 years, it's a very different story. Go back 20 years, it's a very different story. So I think, I think the answer to your question is unfortunately we don't do a lot. We're not able to do a lot. I think our hiring system is just dysfunctional. Those of you that apply for government jobs, we lose a lot of good people because they get other job offers while they're waiting to be onboarded into the government. And the protections that are put in place in the civil service system actually I think work against us because they don't allow us to move people around as flexibly as we would like to give them worthwhile experience and promote them and keep them engaged. It's a big focus of Secretary Carter's right now. He calls it the sort of force of the future idea. We have the best force in uniform now in the world. How do I make sure that my successor has that? What do we need to do today? And one of the things he wants to fix is to try and create more flexibility for civilians than they have now.
Sir, Ethan Rash, Central South State University. With all the movements of ISIL or Russia or China and whatever they're doing, in your three positions in all departments, what would you say that the biggest threat the U.S. faces currently and in the future that we have to look forward to prepare?
So I worry about Russia more than anything. I mean, but 2 years ago we weren't thinking about Russia. We weren't thinking about ISIL. The Chinese are becoming more aggressive and provocative every month. But Russia's what I worry about the most. First of all, it is an existential threat to the United States of America. But they also are restless. They feel very nationalistic. There's still a lot of unease about the dissolution of the Soviet Union and now their adversary right on their border. They are incredibly paranoid about the United States. All the research that we have on them is there's just a complete misunderstanding, I think, of their leadership about what our intentions are. And as bad as Putin is, that whole circle around them is even worse in terms of being sort of insecure and unsettled by what they see surrounding them. The demographics are bad. They're getting older and getting smaller. Their environment is a mess. The price of oil is really hurting them. And so if you're running that country and you have all of these problems, you just keep hitting the nationalist button, and that's what Putin's doing. That's why you see, I think, these aggressive moves. And Ukraine is one thing, Crimea is one thing, but the Baltics are treaty allies of ours. They're members of NATO. Well, that's what I worry about. And it's not just on those borders there. They're doing nefarious things in the Pacific. They're doing nefarious things in the Arctic. And they're not just, like I said, an existential threat. They're doing these actual things and testing our understanding of war. How would we define a treaty violation? Or not a treaty violation, but an incursion that would trigger our Article 5 obligations to NATO members. Because they're not fighting in traditional ways, they're fighting in asymmetric ways. And we haven't quite figured out how to respond to that, how to deal with that. They're using media, they're using cyber. And so I think, ISIL is something that's going to be around for a very long time. And they have the ability, we've seen it, to reach into the United States of America. But Russia's the threat I worry about the most right now, and I think it's the threat we need to be training against. If we needed to get into the Baltics, it's a very contested environment because it is surrounded by Russia. So we need to be building for that and training for that. Yeah.
I'm McKenna from University of Portland in Oregon. You talked a lot about how you worked in different branches and for short periods of time. And I'm just wondering from like a business perspective how you adapt to those environments and actually make an impact in such a short time, so much transition.
Yeah, well, I had the periods maybe are a little bit shorter than I intended them to be. The guy who hired me out of college had 4 jobs in the Clinton administration. Like, that's going to be my model if I come back into the Obama administration. I'm on 6 right now, with a year and a half to go. So maybe not quite the right way to do this, because you do want to have a little tenure in place. But that is one of the first things you have to kind of do, is go in and figure out the culture. But don't let it subsume you, because the different perspective you bring is an important one. And so when I go in, I'm trying to sort of figure out the people, figure out where the power centers are, and figure out, as you said, the culture and the processes. And then I'm going to decide what I'm not going to do like that anymore. When I became acting secretary of the Air Force, after Secretary Donnelly had been there 5-6 years, wonderful man, but we have very different styles. And he had been there long enough that he had successive public affairs directors, successive legislative liaisons. And so I came in and I said, this is all tailored for a different person. This doesn't work for me. But we have an opportunity together to figure out how to do things differently and maybe more effectively. And that's what I've been doing in the Army in the last 2 months, is trying to figure out why do you do it that way. If there's a good reason, okay. If not, let's figure out a new way to do it. Let's evolve this into something else.
Cadet Chapman, U.S. Air Force Academy. Speaking of different cultures, Zoomies are very different from squids and dirt sniffers. So football season's up. So in the inter-academy games, who do you root for?
Oh.
Really
I will root happily for Army this year because they need all the support they can get. I did have one. Well, this actually happened in real time on Friday. The volleyball teams from the Air Force Academy and from West Point were playing, and I almost didn't want to go down because I'm like, it's too soon. But they also had Cal and Harvard, and I went to Dartmouth, and their chief of staff, the Army, went to Princeton. So I'm like, we can agree on one thing: everybody eat Harvard today. When I was acting secretary, I had the football game, so I was acting secretary, so that was kind of fun. So I'm walking onto the field at Annapolis with General Welch for the coin toss, and he says, "Be prepared." I'm like, "What do you mean, be prepared?" He goes, "Our cadets have to be pilots, they have to fit in cockpits. Theirs don't." So we get out onto the field, and we're like maybe taking the ball from Guam or something, like the big Pacific Islanders. They're huge. And so I was hoping, okay, this year West Point would beat Navy. I could take credit for it, and that would rest on my laurels, so I'll just finish on that. But the first games out of the season looked like it's even worse. Navy's really strong game out, and West Point had a pretty bad one. So I'll move the underdog.
Air Force wins every time.
But I'll tell you, so this is
We're getting better.
Air Force has the Commander-in-Chief's trophy, but Army and Navy don't care about that. When I was in the Air Force, I kept saying, but we've got the trophy. When we were up at West Point, I think my second job for a conference, and I learned that it does not matter what you say at West Point, except you have to say beat Navy at the end. If you don't, they'll criticize you. If you do, that's all they remember. It's Navy, 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 Navy. I went to the store, and there was a little clearance section in the corner with the Air Force mugs, half off. Nobody, they just, I just want all the Navy, that's right. Because my old boss is decade in the Navy. I've given them way too many jerseys over the years. So.
Rebecca Case from Louisiana Tech University. What advice would you give to a graduating college senior looking to assist military members as a civilian?
Well, I probably have to ask a few more questions on that. I mean, there are lots of ways to do it. If you're talking about a career, there are jobs all over the country, really all over the world, that are part of the Department of Defense. And so that'd probably be the first thing I would point you to. But aside from that, you could come to Washington, get involved in politics, work on the Hill. But even if it's not a career, there are a number of ways. There are a number of civilian groups out there that are assisting the military, helping families that have members deployed, helping service members transition into the private sector. We have, every sort of generation of war, there's a revolution in battlefield medicine. And what that means for us is we have a lot more injured coming back than we've had in previous wars, and actually a lot more to learn about how people who are coming back are injured. We're going to have this for generations, and so there are a number of different ways. If you're talking about a career, is that what you're talking about as a job? Or?
Yeah, and something non-technical. I'm looking for a psychology side.
Oh, okay. But lots of ways to do that, and it doesn't have to be Department of Defense either. I mean, Department of Veterans Affairs and so forth.
Zach Buzonos, University of Oklahoma. As area commander, I try to push cadets to get involved with civilians, like in Civil Wings, but they seem very resistant. I've been using common arguments that you would say, like they give it a specifically different perspective to all the problem sets that we encounter as military. And I was wondering if you have any specific examples and experiences that I could use to back up that argument.
You're talking about trying to get people involved in get civilians involved in Civil Wings?
Well, get cadets to interact with them and invest in them.
So, get cadets to spend their time. Oh, okay. Well, I think what I tell people, maybe I'm going to go a little bit different direction in answering this. I mentioned earlier, around 3 years into the all-volunteer force. And we fought this war differently. We fought it off the books. We had supplementals for to pay the entire war. And I think we did certain things at the start of the war, 14 years ago, to kind of hide it from society. When we go to war, the country should go to war. There should be a war tax. There should be a part of the country. The all-volunteer force was not really designed to be used the way we used it in this war. But the problem is, we have this growing divide. The previous chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mullen, used to talk about this all the time. We've got a smaller percentage of the country that is serving or has served, and a larger percent that doesn't. And there's a growing divide. And by the way, bases and forts and installations have changed too. Now everything's on the inside of the fence, and you don't have to leave the base if you don't want to. But that creates an increasing lack of understanding of the military on the part of the vast majority of society. And we're seeing that impact us negatively right now, because we're having a hard time building caucuses on the Hill, building the coalition that we need on the Hill to get our budgets back up and to support investing in the military. When I started, it was pretty easy. As a Democrat in national security, we're kind of a different breed because we want national security spending. We always knew we could get the Republicans to vote for it. Now, the larger caucus in the Republican side just wants to cut spending. They'd like to cut it in different places than it's being cut, but if they can cut it, they'll cut it. And so, and really not that understanding they talked about, fewer members have served, as I mentioned. And so I think if you're telling people, other cadets, why they need to get civilians involved, we need civilians to understand why they have a military and why they need to support it, because that support is decreasing.
Ed Mayfield, University of Virginia. So you've led large groups of people in various organizations. What are some leadership skills that you've either learned on the way or that you practice now that you could tell us that would help us in our careers?
So, okay, first is communicate. Second is communicate. Third is communicate. One of my first bosses said we always overestimate the degree to which we communicate. And so I try to keep that in mind all the time. Every time I go to a base, when I'm in the Air Force, I'll start doing that in the Army when I get a little smarter. Bring together as many people as want to come and talk and answer questions. I do it with the headquarters staff. I did it with the Air Force, with the Army. Bring them together, all of them, tell them what's going on, answer their questions. Think about not just your personal communication, but how as an organization, the organization is communicating to all the people. Anytime you make a change in what you do, how do you explain that to people that are being impacted by it? So communicate, communicate, communicate. I think it is incredibly important to always make sure you're taking care of people that work for you, because that's going to make it. By the time I get a slate of candidates, I know they're all qualified. So when I sit down and interview people, it's like, I'm going to work with this person every day, and is this person going to fit into the team that I've put together? And so you want to make sure that you are rewarding people, that you are giving them feedback, that it's direct, that it's actionable, and then you want to take care of problems too. What I've noticed is lots of energy. Well, people will avoid problems that are inside of their organization, and think I can just sort of isolate that person. But what they're not seeing when they do that is the impact that allowing that negativity or that problem to go unchecked, but the impact it has on everyone else in the organization. So those are two things that I would say right away. But I'd go back to the first one: communicate. Focus on relationships. That's critically important. So much is personal. I go into the Air Force. And I had to drive them to get me onto the Hill for meetings. Same thing in the Army. And someone said something to me that really resonated. I was going to Fort Bragg, and they said, "Oh, this congressman here, you don't need to meet with him. He's fine in the Army." I'm like, well, that's exactly who I want to meet with. I don't want to go and be yelled at every time I go into the Hill. But you want to have relationships before you meet them. And so last week, Wednesday and Thursday, I think I met with 14 members. I mean, it was like a forced march on both of those days. But you want to know their staff, you want to know them, so when there's a problem, you're not building a relationship on the fly, and you can take a lot of emotion out of it when you know someone's advanced. So focus on those relationships. Try to find, we have the staffing system in the Pentagon, things work their way up to you, and it's basically, the Secretary of Defense's organization has sent out a memo or an idea, and they're asking for everyone to chop on it. You concur or you non-concur. And I try to avoid ever non-concurring. Like, fix this, or I'll go directly with the person, because I don't want the Army or the Air Force just looking like it's obstinate. But it gives you a mindset where I'm going to focus on how I can get with this person and find a common solution rather than just saying, no, we're
Sir, Cadet Duran from the University of West Florida. Sir, with the budget cuts and the way we're kind of going with things to the military, we find ourselves working with sister services to kind of try to do more with less. Can you talk about the vision you see for the military in the next, let's say, 10 to 20 years on where we're going?
Well, I'd always try to look for silver linings, and the budget pressures have forced the services to interact more. I mean, it's a very joint service. There are lots of rivalries, of course, very different cultures. I mean, the move from the Navy to the Army wasn't anything, the Air Force wasn't anything like from the Air Force to the Army. Very, very different beast altogether. But I think you're going to see, what I think is where the evolution is going to be in the next 10 to 15 years isn't necessarily more jointness among the four services. It is a different way of integrating and utilizing the total force, the components, the reserve, the guard, and the active component. The Army can, like I said in the Air Force, we always talked about active, guard, reserve, civilian. In the Army, we had a changeover. We got a new chief of staff. The outgoing chief of staff and the incoming chief of staff, neither one of them mentioned the guard and reserve in their remarks. My second day on the job was when the Army rolled out its force structure reductions, where in the country those soldiers were going to come from. And they kept saying, we're going to be 450, we're going to be 450, we're going to be 450,000. That's 450,000 active components. They didn't talk about the guard and reserve in their total number. The services, the Air Force is really already there. The Army is getting there. Too small to not think of themselves as a total force and to get more creative in how to use that force. The Air Force had a commission imposed on it by Congress a couple of years ago. The Army's going through that right now. And there will be definitely some recommendations, I'm sure, out of that about how to utilize the guard and reserve. See you on this side.
Sir, how are you? My name is Michael Zabri from Clarkson University. And I'd love to hear your perspective on this situation, primarily on the growing refugee crisis in the Middle East from that situation. If the military is planning on doing anything, or what we can do as civilians, or what the military can do.
It is one of my enormous frustrations about how we fight, not just as a country, how everyone fights. I mean, the military isn't responsible for refugees and shouldn't be responsible for refugees. But we don't factor that in really to how we plan as a nation for war or for any type of activity, uniform armed activity. And so it's just a nightmare to see these images every day of what's going on. I think there are a few things. We don't prioritize, and it's not just the United States, that part, as I said, in terms of planning, in terms of what we want to spend on. We're not prepared for refugees, which are going to be inevitable, displaced persons and refugees in any type of conflict anywhere in the world. The other thing, though, is I think, just as I said earlier, that society is losing its understanding of the uniformed military. There is also not an understanding of who these people are. I think that what people see is, okay, that part of the world is where the terrorists are. Those people are terrorists that are coming over on the boat. That horrific image of the toddler on the beach in Turkey, they were trying to get to Vancouver, where the toddler's aunt is, a resident in Canada. I mean, these are our neighbors. This is a professional class. These are doctors and lawyers and teachers that are trying to get out. We don't talk about it enough. We don't think about it enough. We don't prepare for it enough. And now we see the outgrowth of that. Europe is struggling with what to do. So, but it shouldn't be the military's responsibility to take care of that, but the governments should, in my view, do a lot more than they are.
Sir, Captain Anderson, Fort Meade, follow-up question. How does the senior leadership view the refugee crisis as a security risk of extremists sneaking into Europe or possibly the States as we accept refugees?
They see it as a very serious security risk. Now, those borders are already porous anyhow. I mean, Europe was, even before the refugee crisis, was facing a problem with that. I mean, we've got people going in and out of Europe back to those regions. But that is, you saw Germany's clamping down on its border with Austria now for that exact reason. They're coming too quickly in too large a number to really have a sense of what they're getting and what might be mixed inside of it. So it is a serious security concern. We have to balance that also with the humanitarian needs that we need to address.
We're from University. You're talking about the division of the budget, sir. So I wonder, as we're looking to the future to modernize our force, where do you think that money's going to come from? And do you think maybe we're going to cut back on personnel costs and use that for modernization?
So I would never phrase it that way. There's a whole, not only is sort of Congress shrinking our budget, they're not giving us a budget. Here we could even have another shutdown. Every year we dust off the shutdown plans. It's just a crazy way to run an organization. Not only are they not giving us the money we think we need, they're telling us lots of things we can't stop doing, which is basically a reduction in your top line in addition to not giving you money. I mean, for the Air Force, it was the ongoing battle over the A-10. So we don't have a lot of money. We're trying to balance the needs of the day with the needs of tomorrow. This is one of the platforms we want to get rid of now. We're okay with the Army going down to 450,000 active duty soldiers. Wait a minute, what do you mean taking 5,000 out of my state? So one of those things was pay and compensation reform. We had a number of proposals. Pay, compensation, benefits, those types of things have gone up pretty dramatically in the last 14 years, as they should have. But they were staying on this ramp that was much higher than inflation and eating a higher and higher percentage of our budget. So we were trying to sort of rationalize that, not cut, but figure out, which of these benefits is important, what other things do we need to do, and where have we grown things enough, and what's eating our seed corn, like healthcare costs. So I think we're working through some of those things right now. There was another commission. When Washington can't figure out what to do, it creates a commission. So we had a pay and benefits commission that came out with some recommendations that Congress is working through right now. The House and the Senate are trying to come to some agreements on parts of those. But what you're seeing is where the real trade-off is not between compensation and modernization. It's between readiness and modernization. Readiness today, readiness tomorrow. And you see so we run out of flexibility. Congress says you can't touch this, you can't touch this, you can't touch this, you can't have base closures. What we end up doing is we're letting our bases fall into disrepair with the Army far faster and far more so than the Air Force. And we're cutting training, especially some of the full spectrum training. And so that's where that's really what the balance is. Like, all right, how much training can I cut versus how much modernization? that's where the balance, the trade-offs.
Sir, Chris Arnold, I'm actually a senior auditor for the Defense Contract Audit Agency. We talk about all the time, we're talking about pay increases and cuts of forces. We always talk about the GS schedule, if they're ever going to reassess the cost of living adjustment and how it's inequitable based on where we're living. Because I'm in San Diego. Do you know anything about if they're ever going to look at it again? Because it's not really, if you love TC makes more than San Diego and it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, no, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, so we were wondering if you're ever going to look at it.
Well, it's not our, I have no control or authority over that. You know, Congress has to get involved in those things as well, and they've shown no appetite. They haven't amended anything on the civilian side since I've been here. I mean, the Undersecretary of the Army today makes the exact, not to the penny, that the Undersecretary of the Army 10 years ago made. So unfortunately, you know, what we would like to see are some larger, you know, we had the NSPP, whatever that was, National Security Pay System, NSPS, that we tried and then backed out of. Dr. Carter, Secretary Carter would like to try and get some larger reforms in how we hire and how we compensate civilians. But I just don't know if there is, if there's any appetite for that right now. So, but yeah, if I could change things, I would change a number of things on the civilian side. But you're going to need legislative relief for that. We can't even give us the budget. So.
Last question.
One more. Yeah.
Ben Durant, University of West Florida.
Where is West Florida?
Pensacola, sir. Sir, you made mention that one of the strong suits Air Force has is its total force and how we take into consideration the other services such as Air National Guard. Could you make mention of some of the strong suits the Army or maybe the Navy has that maybe the Air Force can adopt or learn about?
So the Navy doesn't have a guard. And it's funny because Secretary Mavis, Secretary of the Navy, is a former governor of Mississippi, and he said when he was governor, he loved having a guard. Now that he's Secretary of the Navy, he's glad he doesn't have a guard. Guard it's not an easy beast to wrestle because it's not one thing. You know, the guard are 54 different adjutant generals reporting to 54 different governors. The Chief of the National Guard Bureau doesn't speak for them. So it's an interesting beast. What do I think that the other services can learn from the Army? They're all. I think what the Army is sort of most advanced on is really some of the back-end business. The business systems, the big IT platforms that help with logistics, that help manage people. The Army has done more and more successfully in that field than the other services have done. And that's going to help the Army as it thinks through how to work on a total force, because we don't have an easy way in any of the services for knowing what talent we have where, so we can move it around and integrate it. The Army is close, is going to be there first, be able to have everybody in the same system with the information on those people that will allow us to utilize the smaller force we have better. That was the last question. So. Thank you all. I think you guys, General Walter,